Hello again, and welcome to another very exciting episode of Social Studies. This was going to be a very special episode with special effects, etc., but it just got to be too late. I did it at school, and it didn't turn out quite as planned, and I didn't have time to edit. So here we are. I will try to make it very special, anyways, and I will try to make it short for you, hopefully. All right, so this is better transportation and communication. We talked about this, or we'll be talking about it in school. There's some good stories, some good visuals, and some local connections as well. So today is primarily focused on filling in the notes so that we have those done and we can focus. So I'm going to skip over a lot of the exciting, interesting details if I can to get to the notes. So first of all, the main idea here is that roads, canals, and railroads greatly improved transportation during the 1800s. And specifically, of course, we're talking about the early to mid 1800s here, just like everything else in this unit. These improvements enabled more people to move westward and greatly strengthened the U.S. Introduction. During the 1700s, there were very few good roads in the U.S., and travel was slow and difficult. Rivers or boats usually provided the best way to travel or transport goods, but this began to change during the early to mid 1800s. It starts out with something called the American system. So, how did travel improve? How much did travel improve in the early to mid 1800s? Here's an idea. Take a look at New York here. This is showing travel time from New York. This is green is 1 day. So, 1 day would get you this far away from New York. This is in 1800 or beginning of the early to mid 1800s. This orangish color would be how far you get in 3 days of travel. This peachish color would get you 1 week. Canandaigua was right about here. So it's between a week and this darker orange is 3 weeks. So I would guess probably about 2 weeks from New York to Canandaigua in 1800. And right here is the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River, which was the edge of the United States in 1800, that would take 6 weeks from New York City. 6 weeks, a month and a half to get to the Mississippi River. Now, by the end of the early to mid 1800s, 1857 here, you can see that's changed. 1 day will get you anywhere in this region, including Canandaigua. So from New York to Canandaigua, 1 day, 3 days this far, a week to go beyond. Right here is the Mississippi River. So now you can do in 3 days, in 1857, 3 days, what would have taken 6 weeks at the beginning of the early to mid 1800s. So it really improved. How did it improve? Well, this is what roads used to look like. And as we talked about, some people thought like this man, John Quincy Adams, little John Quincy with the curly hair, grew up to be this man without the curly hair. And you can see the wigs have gone out of style by this time, and long pants are in. First photo of a president, John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay. So these guys thought that the federal government should spend money to build roads and bridges and canals. Henry Clay called this the American system. The American system was a plan for the federal government to build roads and canals and bridges because, like Alexander Hamilton, they believed that in order to have a strong country, you need a strong economy. To have a strong economy, you need to have roads and bridges and canals, and that's what the federal government is there for. Now, others disagreed. Of course, they believed in a loose construction, whereas these others who disagreed believed in a strict construction. And that's what's going to happen to the plan is James Monroe will veto the plan because he believes in a strict construction and says that's not in the Constitution. So some roads did get built. These were often called turnpikes. And they were built by private investors, companies trying to make money. Eventually, down the road, the federal government would get involved in road building with a road called the National Road, which would go from Cumberland, Maryland, out to Illinois. All right, that's the National Road by 1850. It would connect eventually. This is what the National Road looks like today. All right, fill in the notes here. You can pause me if you want, or I could hum quietly. No, that's not. I'm not going to do that. Don't worry. All right. This was a plan, American system, a plan proposed by Henry Clay. The federal government would use taxes and tariffs, remember, tariffs are taxes on imports, to raise money that would be used to build roads, bridges, and canals. This plan was vetoed by President Monroe because he thought it was unconstitutional for the federal government to spend money on these things because it wasn't specifically mentioned in the Constitution. In other words, he believed in a strict construction of the Constitution. Roads. Earliest roads were turnpikes, roads built by private investors hoping to make a profit, people paying the tolls. At first, federal government did not build roads, but in 1818, it will open the National Road or the Cumberland Road. All right, moving on. Canals, the big story of the early to mid 1800s. Canals are like artificial man made waterways or rivers. The federal government did not get involved in building canals, but New York State did. DeWitt Clinton was the governor at the time. He came up with this proposal to build a canal all the way across the state. It was a technological wonder. And it connected, this is going to connect a whole bunch of things here. It technically runs from Albany to Buffalo. I'm not going to sing, don't worry. All right, connects Albany and Buffalo, but it also connects the Hudson River right here, which you should recognize, to Lake Erie right here. That's where Buffalo is, by the way. There's where Albany is. This is the Hudson River. And down here is New York City. So it also connects the Atlantic Ocean and the Great Lakes with the help of the Hudson River. And it also connects New York City with the help of the Hudson River with these farmers and markets out in the West, in the Northwest Territory, in the Western states. And these farmers with East Coast markets. Since most people lived in New York or Philadelphia or Boston, now they could get these goods to markets. It was a huge success, led to other canals being built to connect to it and in other states. And here you see some lovely pictures of the Erie Canal. I will pause for a moment while you can sing the Erie Canal song. Very good, those of you who sang. Some of you, I don't think you did, but you can work on that. If you don't know the Erie Canal song, look it up. It's worth watching. It's a great, catchy tune. All right, more pictures of the canal. How locks work. They're basically elevators to raise and lower the water for the boats so they can go up or downhill. All right, this is a picture of loading barrels of apples onto the Erie Canal in Medina, New York. So all of a sudden, these farmers in upstate New York and beyond in the Northwest Territory, now they can sell food to the cities in the East. Now, transportation costs drop dramatically. It's going to lead to a much, much lower food prices in the cities and stuff. So, it's travel time and transportation costs are going to be greatly reduced by the canal. There you can check the song. The age of the canal will end with the rise of the steam engine. The steam engine, which will be used for all sorts of things in factories and for transportation. Robert Fulton is going to take advantage of the steam engine to build this boat called the Clermont, which is the first commercially successful steamboat. Then later, railroads are going to take advantage of them as well. So to fill in the notes here, the Erie Canal, which was built by New York State, opened in 1825, connected Albany or New York City or the Atlantic Ocean or the Hudson River to Buffalo or Lake Erie, the Western Lands, etc. Go back to that. Oh, you can't go back. Oh, well. Connects a lot. It was a huge success, greatly reduced travel time between the eastern and the western lands, greatly reduced transportation costs, and allowed farmers to ship their crops to markets in the east. Made New York City and Buffalo very large, important cities. Buffalo had been really a nothing city until the Erie Canal opens, and then it becomes a major city. New York City was big, it becomes bigger. Other states soon copied, and by 1840, there were over 3,000 miles of canals in the United States. I will not ask you how many, but Just know there were a lot of canals. All right, steamboats we mentioned made it possible to travel faster, carry heavier loads, and travel upstream more easily. Robert Fulton made the first commercially successful steamboat called the Clermont. You don't need to memorize that, don't worry. All right, railroads. We talked about some railroads and how they got started down in the coal mines and then they came to the United States. They are going to kind of replace the canals because they can go faster, they can carry heavier loads using the steam engines. Um, Steam engines are much faster, more powerful than horses, and unfortunately, they do blow up more than horses, and that was a risk you would take. But that's why we don't have steam engines very much today. But that's kind of how railroads and the steam engines replace the horse-drawn trains and also kind of replace the horse-drawn barges on the Erie Canal. All right, so you can see this again, how travel times improved. To fill in the notes, the early railroads used animal power. Later, steam engines or steam power made railroads more faster and more useful. The use of steam-powered locomotives began in England, but came to the U.S. in the 1820s. First passenger railroad had 13 miles in Baltimore in 1830. You don't need to know how many miles, just to show you that it increased dramatically. 10 years later, 1840, there were 3,000 miles. Again, you don't need to know that. It's just that there were a lot. Just to show how quickly they grew, I guess is what I'm trying to say. They were often not connected to one another. You might go 20 miles on a train and then have to get off and find the next 10 miles before you can get on a train again. They didn't always get connected until after until the end of the 1800s, the second industrial revolution. Most railroads were in the north, just like the Erie Canal was in the north, and they connected east and west, just like the Erie Canal. So there starts to be this connection between east and west in the north, whereas not as much in the south. The southern states had fewer railroads because they had fewer cities, they were more they rural agricultural. They had their plantations growing their cotton, etc. Railroad networks grew more quickly after the Second Civil War. I'm sorry, after the Civil War, the Second Industrial Revolution, and then some benefits of railroads versus like canals or horses. They're faster, carry heavier loads, they're more efficient, they're cheaper transportation, etc. All right, this is the telegraph machine. Communications also improved during the early to mid 1800s as a result of better transportation, because if most of the messages, most communication was through the mail, faster travel meant that mail traveled faster, so communications improved. Also, though, the invention of the telegraph is going to quickly make instantaneous communications possible. And you can see telegraph wires were often strung right along with the railroads, and those made it possible to communicate instantly over long distances. So, better transportation also improved communication. Samuel Morse, you may have heard of Morse code, invents the telegraph. And again, you don't know how many miles they're worth, just that it grew very quickly. All right, results of the Industrial Revolution. This goes in the bottom here. I don't have a picture of it, but you had this word follows along word for word, I believe. So one result was economic growth. That's the first blank. The U.S. became wealthier and more powerful as productivity increased and the economy grew. That was number one. Number two, more manufactured goods and lower prices. So more things made in factories, not by hand, like clothing, textiles, meant that more people could afford them. The prices were lower. More factory jobs for women and children. The growth of cities, that's number four, which is called urbanization, urban versus rural. Urbanization, the growth of cities, fancy word. And more people began to move west, where there were larger and more productive farms. Also, increased slavery, this is number six, increased slavery in southern states led to more sectionalism. Sectionalism is thinking like sectional differences. Basically, it's the North and South are becoming very different from one another, and both the North and South are starting to mistrust the other and mostly look out for their own sake and not for the good of the whole country. So that is the end of the first industrial revolution, and that is all I have. So have a great